They never told you this part, did they? That the moment you give your soul to her smile, you start losing pieces of yourself you'll never get back. You thought it was love. You thought changing for her meant growth. You thought pleasing her meant you were being a good man. But now, something inside you feels missing. You look in the mirror and wonder, when did I stop being me? There's a letter, one Freud never dared to publish. Because it held a truth that would tear illusions apart. A truth about women and the silent way they can own a man without him ever noticing. And today, you're going to hear it. But not from a textbook, not from some theory. You'll hear it through a story that might feel a little too familiar. Because if you've ever chased someone's smile just to silence the fear of losing them, if you've ever bent so far to please her that you forgot what your own voice sounded like, then this might not just be a video. It might be the beginning of your awakening. Thank you for being here, and I hope you'll stay until the end. Ethan had always been curious about the mind. Not just his own, but what made people tick. What made love so intoxicating and yet so terrifying. It wasn't something he talked about, not with his friends, not even with Claire. But one night while scrolling through a forgotten forum, he found something that stopped him cold. A letter, attributed anonymously to Freud. It wasn't official, it wasn't published. But it read like the voice of a man who had seen something and wished he hadn't. The letter didn't speak of biology or theories. It whispered about power, a kind of power that didn't scream or shove or threaten. A power that smiled. Ethan stared at the screen, the words seeping into him. This isn't about seduction, the letter read. This is about something far quieter and far more dangerous. He couldn't sleep that night. He couldn't stop thinking about Claire, her glances, her silences, the moment she pulled away and he ran after her without knowing why. He remembered how her laugh used to make him feel 10 feet tall, how her silence made him feel invisible. And then the line that hit him like a hammer. The moment you need her approval more than your own, you've handed her the keys to your soul. He didn't know why that shook him so deeply, or maybe he did. Because somewhere along the way, Claire had stopped being just a person to love. She'd become the mirror Ethan judged himself by. And every frown, every pause, every glance away felt like a verdict. The letter went on. It said this truth was too raw to be shared openly, that most men weren't ready to hear it, that even Freud, who had spent his life unraveling the human psyche, had chosen silence in the end. But Ethan wasn't ready to be silent anymore. He printed the letter, folded it, carried it in his wallet, because something about it made him feel like he wasn't crazy, like maybe, just maybe, someone had seen what he'd been living through, but never had the words for. And that's how this began, not with heartbreak, not with betrayal, but with a single sentence and a man who realized that love, real or not, should never cost you yourself. He didn't know it then, but that letter would become the thread that unraveled everything. And in its unraveling, he would begin to find himself again. The first time she stayed silent, something cracked inside me. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even a disagreement. Just a moment when I said something honest and Claire didn't smile, that was it. No words, no reaction, just that quiet distance like the air had thickened between us. And I remember thinking, what did I do wrong? Did I say too much? Should I take it back? That was the night I began to shift, not dramatically, not enough for anyone to notice, just enough to keep her smile from fading. I started softening my opinions. I avoided subjects that made her pause. I changed my shirt if I saw her frown, and every time she smiled again, it felt like the sun breaking through storm clouds. At first, I told myself it was love, that compromise was part of connection, that growing together meant adapting, but it wasn't adaptation. It was erasure, little by little. I trimmed off the edges of who I was, the sarcasm she found too sharp, the hobbies she didn't understand, the friends she didn't quite like, all faded from my life. And yet I felt proud, because every time she laughed at my jokes, every time she looked at me like I was enough, I felt like I'd won. I didn't know it then, but I was building a prison with bricks made of approval. And I was locking myself in, smile by smile, It didn't feel wrong, it felt like affection, like intimacy. Until one night I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man looking back, not because I looked different, but because he looked uncertain. Like he was waiting for someone to tell him who to be. That's when it hit me. I hadn't been growing, I had been bending so slowly, so willingly, that I mistook submission for love. And Claire, she hadn't asked for this. She never told me to change, she never said, become someone else. She just smiled or didn't, and I filled in the rest. Because somewhere deep down, I believed her smile meant safety, that her approval meant worth, that her silence meant I had failed. But the truth, her silence wasn't the problem, my fear of it was. And that fear, that longing to be seen through her eyes instead of my own, that was the first chain I wrapped around myself. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever twisted yourself into someone else just to keep their gaze on you, leave a comment. Not for me, but for the part of you that wants to be heard again. Because this is not just a story, it's a pattern. And unless we name it, we keep living it. But what if the smile we chase isn't a gift, but a test? What if the approval we crave is the very thing keeping us from becoming who we're meant to be? There was a time when I thought her smile was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Not because of her lips, not because of how it lit up a room, but because of what it made me feel, seen, chosen, important. Every time Claire smiled at something I said, it felt like I was doing life right, like I had cracked the code. Say the right thing, earn the reward. Do the right thing, get the warmth. But slowly, that smile became more than a reward. It became a command, not loud, not obvious, just always present, and I began to crave it. I didn't notice it at first. It started with small shifts. I'd check her reaction before I finished a sentence. I'd watch her eyes while I spoke. I learned the rhythm of her approval like a song. And when she smiled, I felt invincible. When she did, I questioned everything. Was it my tone, my timing? Had I disappointed her? Her smile wasn't just affection, it was direction. It told me where to go, who to be, what was acceptable. And I followed it like a compass, even when it pulled me away from myself. You see, when you start shaping your identity around someone else's reaction, you stop living as a man and start performing as a version of one. I thought I was just being a good partner, but I was becoming a reflection. And here's the most dangerous part. Claire never asked me to change. She didn't issue ultimatums. She didn't give commands. She just smiled when I aligned and withdrew when I didn't. That was enough. That's all it took. Because approval doesn't need a voice. It needs a craving, and I had it. I needed her smile more than I needed my own self-respect. I needed her good job more than I needed my own truth. I had handed her the power without her even asking. But you can't blame someone for holding the leash when you're the one who knelt. And that's what this was, a leash, wrapped in laughter, tied with a glance, invisible to the world, but pulling me tighter with every nod I earned. The smile I once adored had become the collar I wore, and I wore it proudly, until the day I realized I hadn't been walking beside her, I'd been following. And in following her approval, I'd lost the map back to myself. I once read that real control never looks like control. It looks like love, it looks like warmth, it looks like the things you've always wanted. But beneath that softness, there are strings, not pulled hard, not yanked, just tugged gently over time. And if you're not paying attention, you'll swear you're moving freely, while every step you take is being guided by someone else's silence. That was me, and it took me years to see it. The day I realized it was a random Tuesday, nothing dramatic, nothing explosive. Claire had asked me a question, something simple. I gave an honest answer. She didn't respond, didn't smile, didn't speak. She just turned away. And that silence hit harder than any argument ever could. It was in that silence I realized something terrifying. She didn't have to say a word to shift my behavior. Her approval had trained me better than any command. I traced it back to the way I stopped wearing certain shirts because she once paused before complimenting me, to how I quit playing music around the house because she didn't seem to enjoy it, to how I filtered my thoughts before I spoke, always pre-editing for her comfort. And the most haunting part, She never asked me to, she never told me to change. She didn't need to because somewhere along the way I had handed her the remote control to my identity. And she learned, without even trying, how to push the buttons that made me jump. It was never loud. It was never aggressive. It was quiet. It was emotional. It was the invisible hand that reshaped my mind one smile at a time. And when the smiles stopped, I scrambled. That's when I knew. I had built my sense of peace on someone else's expression. And when that expression shifted, my whole world tilted. I kept waiting for her to say something, to guide me back, to tell me I was still okay, but she didn't. And that was the final lesson. The most powerful control doesn't come from force, it comes from influence. From knowing someone wants your approval so badly, they'll rewrite themselves just to keep it. I had become that person, not because she demanded it, but because I needed it. I had mistaken emotional influence for emotional intimacy. And until I named that for what it was, I couldn't reclaim who I used to be. If you've ever been there, if you've ever shaped your entire identity around someone else's subtle cues, leave a comment. You're not alone. And you're not broken. You were just trained to believe that silence meant failure, and that a smile was salvation. But what if the most dangerous power is the one you never see coming, and what if you gave it away willingly? That night, I sat alone in my apartment. No music, no TV, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't surround you but echoes inside you. And in that stillness, a question surfaced like a breath rising from the bottom of a deep lake. What do I even like? It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I didn't have answers, but because every answer I could think of had her in it. I liked the shows she liked, the food she preferred, the books she found interesting. Even the way I decorated my living room was a reflection of her taste. I wasn't a man anymore. I was a collage pieced together from all the things she smiled at. I stood up, walked to the mirror. I didn't look broken. I didn't look sad, but I didn't look like me either. And suddenly, I remembered something. Before Claire, I used to paint nothing professional, just splashes of color when words weren't enough. I hadn't picked up a brush in over 2 years. Why? Because she once walked past a canvas I was working on, paused, and said nothing. That silence had been louder than any critique. And just like that, I'd stopped painting. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just changed for her. I'd erased myself for her, not because she asked. Not because she wanted me to, but because I believed that her approval was the only path to love, that if she kept smiling, I'd stay worthy. But here's the cost of that belief. You start living like a shapeshifter, always adjusting, always guessing. And in that guessing, you lose grip of who you are. You become so addicted to her nods and glances, you forget what it feels like to just be, without needing anyone to clap. It's not love, it's performance. It's not connection. It's dependency, and dependency disguised as devotion is the slowest kind of death. I realized I'd been chasing her smile like a man dying of thirst, but no matter how often I got it, I was still dry inside. Because real fulfillment doesn't come from being approved of, it comes from being aligned with yourself, and I was miles off course. That night I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stared into that mirror and whispered, I miss me. Not the man she loved, not the version I'd built to keep her happy, but the man who painted, who laughed at his own jokes, who wore what he wanted, said what he felt, and didn't fear silence. And right there in that quiet apartment, I knew the chase had to stop, not because she wasn't worth it, but because I was. Because no smile, no matter how beautiful, is worth losing yourself for. She said, I love you, softly, gently, like it was supposed to fix everything. And for a moment, I wanted it to. I wanted those words to carry me back into certainty, to erase the doubt, to dissolve the quiet ache in my chest, but they didn't. Because this time, I heard something different in them, not affection, not depth, but something conditional, something that only existed if I stayed inside the lines she had quietly drawn around me. I love you. When you agree with me, I love you. When you're easy to be around, I love you. As long as you don't challenge me. As long as you don't become inconvenient. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even intentional, but it was there. And I realized then I hadn't been loved for who I was. I had been loved for who I became, for the version of me that adapted, softened, and stayed small. And for a long time I believed that was love, that to be loved meant to bend, to sacrifice, to serve. That if I just did more, softened more, gave more, she'd stay. She'd love me better, she'd see me fully. But that moment never came, because the more I bent, the less she respected me, not because she was cruel, but because deep down respect doesn't come from ease, it comes from edges, and I had none left. That's the paradox no one talks about. The more you erase yourself to be loved, the harder it becomes for someone to actually love you, because you're no longer real, you're agreeable, pleasant, safe. But real love doesn't need you to be safe, it needs you to be honest. To be whole, to be a man who stands in his truth even when it makes things harder. Claire once told me she loved that I listened, that I was kind, that I didn't fight her the way others did. But what she didn't say, what I didn't hear until it was too late, was that she missed the friction, the challenge, the fire. She missed the man I was before I turned myself into her peace. And maybe that's what she fell in love with in the first place, a man with a spine. But I had given that up, not because she asked, but because I thought that was the way to keep her. And the irony, the moment I lost myself, was the moment I began to lose her too. Love can survive imperfection, it can survive conflict, it can survive discomfort, but it cannot survive the death of self. And that's what I had given piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left to love. So when she said, "I love you," I didn't smile, because the man she loved wasn't in the room anymore. And maybe, just maybe, neither was she. It was a Wednesday. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she didn't even look upset, she just went quiet. And somehow that silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I remember standing in the kitchen watching her scroll through her phone, her eyes distant, her presence absent. And in that moment, every cell in my body screamed to fix it, to say something, to do something. To close the gap, I asked, "Is everything okay?" She nodded barely, but the silence stayed, and I felt it like a weight pressing into my chest. Like gravity had shifted in the room, like I had done something wrong and didn't even know what. That's when I realized the game I'd been playing, the invisible war, a battle not fought with words or fists, but with pauses, with subtle glances, with withheld affection. I thought I was just being considerate, just trying to keep the peace. But the truth, I was surrendering over and over again. And she didn't have to lift a finger, because when a man needs her presence more than he needs his own principles, he becomes easy to break. She could go silent and I'd question everything. She could withhold a smile and I'd rewrite myself just to get it back. Not because she demanded it, but because I couldn't stand the stillness between us. Because I had tied my worth to her warmth. And when it cooled, I froze. That's the hidden war Freud wrote about, not the one between people, but the one inside a man, between his need to be loved and his duty to stand in who he is. I lost that war again and again. I apologized for things I didn't do. I changed my mind just to avoid friction. I shrank so she wouldn't leave, but one day something shifted. She went silent. And I didn't chase, I didn't plead, I didn't fill the space with empty words. I just stood there, still unmoved. And that silence, it wasn't comfortable, but it was mine. It was the first moment in years where I didn't fold just to feel safe again. And she noticed, she looked up, surprised, because for the first time I wasn't playing the role, I wasn't her mirror, I was just myself. The silence didn't win that time, because I didn't let it define me. And in that moment, I began to understand. A man's strength isn't proven by how fast he can make her smile again. It's proven by whether he still respects himself when she won't. I found the notebook by accident, tucked between old receipts and forgotten paperwork, buried in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed. But as soon as I flipped it open, I remembered what it was, my journal. Back when I used to write just for myself. No filter, no performance, no fear of judgment. And on the first page, in bold letters, I had written, "Live by your code, or live by someone else's mood." I stared at that line for a long time, because somewhere along the way I had stopped writing in that notebook, stopped living by any code at all. Instead, I'd been waking up each day wondering, What will she think of this? Will this make her happy? Should I hold back just in case? That wasn't a life, it was a script. A role I was playing in someone else's movie, so I picked up a pen, not to perform, not to please, but to reclaim. And I wrote down 3 things. I will speak the truth, even if it risks the silence. I will not chase approval. I was a man before I met her. I'll be one if she leaves. That was the beginning of something new, something solid. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was return. A quiet homecoming to the man I used to be. The man I'd buried under nods and smiles and silences. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I played my music loud. I wore the shirts she never liked. I painted again, wild, messy strokes without meaning. And for the first time in a long time, I laughed without checking if she was laughing too. I didn't become cold. I didn't shut down. I just stopped apologizing for existing. That's when I understood what Freud meant by the stoic man. Not emotionless, not distant, but anchored. A man who doesn't bend every time the wind changes. A man who doesn't crumble when she frowns. A man who can hold space for love without making it his source of identity. And the irony, the more I stood in that strength, the more she noticed. She saw the shift, she felt the difference. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing calmly, clearly, without fear. And in that stillness, something returned to her eyes, a kind of respect I hadn't seen in years. Because deep down, no woman truly respects the man who dances for her smile. But every woman feels something for the man who refuses to be broken by her silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I simply became immovable, like a mountain in a storm, and in that space, that grounded, silent space, I found something stronger than love. I found self-respect. She called one evening out of nowhere, no build-up, no warning, just her name lighting up my screen like a ghost from another life. I answered. Her voice was soft, familiar. Like it used to be before everything got quiet between us. She asked if I wanted to meet. Just talk, nothing heavy, and maybe in the past I would have read that as a chance, a window to fix things, to make her smile again. But this time I wasn't chasing. We met at the coffee shop where we used to sit on Sundays, same table, same corner booth. She smiled when she saw me. And I smiled back, not out of hope, not out of longing, just acknowledgement. She started talking, catching up. Dropping hints about things that used to pull me in, her laugh, her memories, the way she looked at me like we never really ended. And then like clockwork she paused, she grew quiet, waited. I could feel the silence stretch out like a net. The old version of me would have rushed in, filling the space, fixing the air, offering some soft apology for something I hadn't even done. But this time, I let the silence stay. I didn't flinch, didn't lean in, didn't reach for her comfort. I just sipped my coffee and held my ground. And that's when it happened. She shifted, subtly, uncomfortably, because the power she used to hold, the unspoken authority in her stillness, no longer worked. I wasn't playing the game. I didn't need her warmth. I didn't fear her cold. I was me, not angry, not guarded, just whole. And you could see it in her eyes, that moment of realization, that the man across from her was no longer waiting for her cue. He wasn't seeking approval. He wasn't scanning for acceptance. He was simply there, a complete man with or without her. She asked if I missed her. I said I missed who we were before I stopped being me. She didn't respond, and that silence, it didn't shake me, it freed me. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to win her back. I wasn't trying to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. We finished our coffee, no drama, no confessions. Just a quiet understanding that something had ended long before this conversation. And as I walked out into the cool evening air, I felt lighter, not because she might return, but because I finally had back to who I was, back to who I was always meant to be, a man who doesn't beg for love, a man who doesn't shrink in silence, a man who knows sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. It's been a year since that coffee shop. I still think about her sometimes, not with anger, not with regret, just clarity. I remember her smile, her silences, the quiet way she could shift the atmosphere of a room without saying a word. And I remember how much of myself I gave away just to keep her from walking away. But now I live differently. I don't move through life waiting for someone else to validate my steps. I don't shrink at disapproval. I don't panic at silence. Because I finally understand, love is not measured by how much of yourself you can sacrifice. It's measured by how much of yourself you refuse to lose. I wake up early. I write in that same notebook. I play music I actually like. I speak honestly even when it's uncomfortable. And if someone pulls back, if someone withdraws their warmth to test me, I don't chase. I do fold. I don't rewrite myself to fit back into their comfort zone. Because I've learned you can't build a life on someone else's approval. You can only build it on truth, your truth. The man I am now, he still loves, he still gives. But he doesn't disappear in the process. He stays visible, present, unapologetically whole. I've met new people since then. Some have stayed, some haven't. But none of them get to hold the keys to who I am. Because that part of me, it's mine now. And if I could say one thing to the man I used to be, the one who twisted himself into knots just to see her smile, say this: you don't need to be liked to be worthy. You don't need to be understood to stand strong. And you damn sure don't need her silence to define your worth. You were born with a backbone. Don't trade it for comfort. Don't trade it for approval. Don't trade it for love that only exists when you're easy to manage. Because the woman who truly sees you won't need you to shrink. She'll respect the space you take up. But she'll never find you if you keep erasing yourself to be found. So be bold. Be loud if you need to. Be still if you must. But above all, be yours. Because the man who belongs to himself is the only kind of man who ever truly walks free. And if that truth stirred something inside you, don't scroll past it. Sit with it. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Then live it. Live like a man who no longer performs for a smile. Live like a man who no longer fears silence. Live like a man who is done waiting for permission to be whole, because you are, and you always have been. But what if that love is quietly breaking them? This raw, emotional journey reveals how seeking her smile can cost you your soul, and what it really takes to be free. Watch if you're ready to reclaim your power. Bookmark hashtags: male psychology, stoic man, emotional power, #self-respect, #break the chains, red pill, awakening, love and control, modern masculinity, magnifying glass, tilted left, SEO, keyword 3, T letter 1 EA7NG, T letter 1 EA7NG1, masculinity, relationships, psychology, T letter 1 EA7NG2, male self-worth, approval, addiction, emotional control, T letter 1 EA7NG3, N16:9 ratio. Several male characters in different emotional states. One man on his knees looking lost. One staring into a mirror with confusion. One standing tall with calm determination. Their faces show clear emotion, pain, realization, and strength. The background is dominated by deep red tones to convey tension and danger. Silhouettes of female figures loom subtly behind them, with one woman smiling and another turned away in silence. Add bold, attention-grabbing subheadline in English. Her smile was the trap. Style should be cinematic, dark, high contrast, emotionally gripping, designed to attract men struggling with identity and approval issues.